Now, the next individual is Malcolm X. Malcolm X was the first, well, I won't necessarily say he was the first, but he was one of the premier black, him and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Were the first actually prominent black leaders of the time whose influence was greatly, they had great influence over the majority of the black community. So much so that whites who previous to them basically felt that blacks did not have any leadership or nobody to direct them on how to go about doing things. They would have to depend on whites to do this. This is what the Democrats were thinking. But along comes the likes of Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, the only reason why I'm putting Malcolm X first is because he was the next person to be a threat to whites, and especially the Democratic Party. Because shortly after JFK got assassinated, among other things, I believe Malcolm X was seeing what the Democratic Party was up to, because too many times when people were in a position to elevate the black community, when whites were able to elevate the black community and be in a position to do it because of their positions, they somehow or other died or got assassinated. And Malcolm X was the first black leader. We had Medgar Evers and so forth that were also being assassinated and things like that. But Malcolm X was more or less nationally known. And he was one that actually challenged. He would not only tell the black community to get in these white folks' face if necessary, but he would do it on national TV. There are several speeches that Malcolm X made during the time he was in the position of being, having a great influence on the majority of the black community, so much so that he actually became a threat to the control that the Democratic Party had on the black community. And he pretty much made the statement that's why, things are the way they are for the black community. And he was telling the black community, in a sense, to rise up and demand respect and this, that, and the other. And these Democrats weren't going to have it. Well, naturally, as the way things were going, they couldn't have a white person assassinate a black leader. They had to get somebody black to do it. Now, a lot of people tend to think that the rift between Malcolm X and then the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had gotten to a point where Elijah Muhammad or some of his followers that were directly, even though Malcolm X was one of the prime leaders in the Nation of Islam, there's been a lot of speculation and things going around that because of the falling out that Malcolm X had with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad led to Elijah Muhammad sending somebody to assassinate Malcolm X. But an underlying factor to that, I believe, and like I said, only thing I can go by is the circumstances, is the fact that Malcolm X was such a threat to Democrats that they had to get him out of the way, because he was essentially raising up an army, so to speak. They thought, to essentially get out here and commit all types of violence and so forth. So he had to be assassinated, which later on, as we know, he was. So once again, we have somebody in leadership that the black community had, as a position, somebody to look on to give them some direction, and the end result was that person was assassinated. Then we get to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. 1968. Well, going through, past and so forth, from back when Martin Luther King first came into notoriety, or, being acknowledged as a leader in the community, as I said, along with Malcolm X, was the fact that Dr. King didn't want to take a violent approach. He wanted to use peace. He used as an example Jesus Christ and Mahatma Gandhi as how to essentially battle against this enemy of racism, this enemy that was keeping us in bondage and under subjection and making life and stuff miserable for us. Dr. King took the approach of non-violence, which a lot of blacks at first resisted. While Malcolm X was alive, we were kind of split. Some wanted to use violence, take up arms and things like that, while Dr. King was talking about doing things on a peaceful platform and footing and so forth, so that we would not be, like I said, outlining the things as Christ would do it, where we don't reward violence with violence and things, but we do everything on a peaceful level. And though a lot of blacks at first did not go along with it, Dr. King encouraged them by, peaceful marches and protests on things like desegregating counters where blacks couldn't eat in a restaurant or something. They had to can't be served in the restaurant, or if they go to the restaurant or something, they had a black section. You go to the restroom, there's a black section, a black restroom if they had one, or you had to go outside. Anyway, all of that stuff boiled down to the fact that Dr. King says the way we're going to overcome this with nonviolence. We did sit-ins and things, and the result was what happened. The police would come in with their dogs, with their batons and things, and beat people. They would turn water hoses on blacks that were marching and things in protest, all for the wanting to be able to vote. Because see, up to that point, voting in the South, as far as blacks was concerned, was you take your life in your hands if you tried to go vote. Most polls and things would not even allow a black person in to vote. You couldn't drink water except for out of certain water fountains and things. I mean, it was a mess down south. Now, I'm from up north here in Detroit. We didn't have all of that. At least I didn't experience back then. I was born in 1946. Well, you know, I was 21 and stuff when I basically got back here to Detroit after being in the Air Force. I didn't experience the riots. I got back here shortly after the riots, and then, like I said, it was the next year, '68, when Dr. King was assassinated. But I was aware of some of the things that he was saying and some of the speeches that he made. And some of the speeches that he made essentially tied in with the fact that he had a vision for the black community to achieve certain things, but we were going to do it through non-violence, because violence begets violence and so forth like that. And like I said, it took some time for blacks to begin to come around on that issue, but they started listening to his philosophy, his sermons and so forth. And one of his sermons, you know, where he talked about how that, among other things, that he wanted to see a situation where men, now listen carefully, where men are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Now, the reason why he said that was twofold. First of all, he was telling blacks that don't judge a person because of the color of their skin. In other words, don't judge a white person as automatically being a racist because they are white. If you're going to judge somebody as to whether they're racist or not, is if you observe them enough, they're going to say and do things that's going to show you whether or not they're racist. Then you can label that person a racist, while at the same time he was saying he had a vision that whites would not judge blacks or African Americans by the color of their skin, but rather by the content of their character or our character. In other words, he was laying a level playing field for everybody that wanted to take heed to these words, which is the same thing that Jesus said, you know, in passages of scripture, among which one was, and I might put that scripture up across the screen here, where Jesus said, by their fruits you shall know them. What Jesus was talking about is that the only way you're going to know was, see, at that time Jesus was talking about whether a person was a follower of his or not. Well, to expand that, that meant that, you know, don't judge the person by how they look. Judge them by what they say and do. That's the fruits. What comes out of their mouth and how they respond to certain things like that. Then you can tell for sure whether this person is a follower of Christ, or whether this person is or is not a racist, or whether or not this black person that you're looking at is somebody that needs to be feared, and that you need to go on the other side of the road. Don't hire them or anything else because all blacks are bad. No, he was trying to lay the groundwork for a level playing field by saying don't judge them by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. This is key in the next thing that I'm going to say that happened. Once again, Democrats were listening to what Dr. King was saying, looking at the strides and things that the black community was making under the leadership or following of Dr. King. I mean, you know, after all, when you've been seeing blacks being beaten by the police and having dogs sit on them and things, some other people being killed and lynchings and stuff, all of this stuff going on. Black folks didn't get violent because the Democrats were waiting for them to get violent so they could really show out and start killing blacks, but they couldn't do it because blacks were upholding what Dr. King was saying about nonviolence and things. And the Democrats started looking, and some of their own people, some of the whites, were starting to say they were getting tired of seeing black folks being lynched and beaten and things and this, that, and other. And they started being won over to supporting the black community, the black movement in this nation, which the Democrats really got upset with. So what happened? Bam! Dr. King is assassinated. And so once again, we see where Democrats being fearful of the likes of Malcolm X and Dr. King and the platforms that they were running, responded by, once again, assassinations. Now, like I'm saying, my reason for bringing all of this stuff up is the fact that, as you can see, the Democrats are still engaged in racism because, like I said, their ultimate goal is to keep the black community under their control or under their feet. But as progress is being made, the overt type of racism that was being prevalent early on and up to this point of Dr. King's assassination, and a little bit after that, was starting to fade. It was beginning to be old news, but the Democrats still had some tricks up their sleeve as to how to keep the black community dependent on them. Well, now, having gone through that, hopefully in this final section, I'll be able to get everything together and tie it up into one nice package for you so you can understand why I am saying the fact that the Democratic Party is trying to pull the wool over everybody's eyes, especially the black community's eyes, by claiming that they are now the friend of the African American community in this nation, while the Republicans, on the other hand, have done a total 180 and have essentially become the enemy of the black community, which is a lie. And that's what I'm going to address by showing you some things, recapping on what I've said already, and tying everything together. Now we know that shortly after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, Robert Francis Kennedy, the second, the brother of President John F. Kennedy, he rose up and was going to run for office as president, and he was on his way to doing that until he got assassinated. Now the thing about him is, once again, he was popular with the black community. The black community saw him because he had the same vision and things as his older brother John F. Kennedy had for when he was in office, as far as for the black community in this nation. And the Democrats, they reacted fairly quickly when they saw the support that Robert Francis Kennedy was getting from the black community in this nation. So what happened? Bam! 2 or 3 months after Dr. King is assassinated, RFK is assassinated. Now see, all of this stuff that's happening, it cannot be coincidence. This stuff was planned out. It was an actual plan to eliminate, as I said earlier, any policy or anybody that comes along that threatens the control of the Democratic Party over the black community in this nation. They have got to go. But as time marched on, as people got tired of all the violence and all the killing and all of this, that, and the other, the Democrats come up with a new policy of trying to make it appear, like I say, that they're friends of the black community. And I'm going to talk about how they did that in this final section. Okay, let's review what we have so far. Going back to Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln brought an end to, or started the case that would basically bring an end to slavery. He gets assassinated by left-wing leaning Democrats, which, like I say, back then, with all of the different parties and things that they had running back then, the major philosophy was to keep slavery legal. He had to go, so those that leaned towards keeping slavery legal eliminated him. Okay, now we fast forward 1963. John Fitzgerald Kennedy puts forth policies and has a vision to once again lift the black community out of the doldrums, out of the muck and the mire, so to speak, that they were in, poverty and dependence on government and so forth for their subsistence, for their existence, which is a term of slavery. Again, see, the Democrats will adapt policies and things to essentially keep blacks on the quote-unquote plantation. This time, they did it by, the Democrats were using things like welfare. People, there weren't enough jobs, jobs weren't necessarily hiring blacks anyway. They were hiring all whites. And John F. Fitzgerald Kennedy comes in office and he says, this has got to stop. We got to have more jobs, and we need to get people off of dependence on the government. Hence, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what can you do for your country. And John Fitzgerald Kennedy's plans were to get businesses to start hiring more people, hopefully, which would cause more jobs to be available for blacks to go to be a part, to get, so that they can begin to make some progress into achieving the American dream. And as a result of that, he encouraged businesses to expand by offering tax breaks and things to them, which, if you will look at what happened in 1980 when Ronald Reagan took office, Ronald Reagan used the exact same formulas that JFK had been expounding on when he was in office, and everybody laughed at it and said it was, and even some Republicans laughed at it. I remember George Bush, his vice president, when he was running against him, called it trickle-down economics and things like that, and that it was voodoo economics or something along that line. But look what happened in the 80s when he expanded, when he basically enacted these policies. The economy boomed. The black community blacks started getting all types of good jobs and things and carrying on, and the black community, the majority of the black community were lifted up out of the poverty class and got up into the middle class, starting to buy homes and nice cars and things and stuff like this. All of this because of the fact that the policies that the Democrats probably knew that JFK's policies would do this, but they never expected that a Republican would enact the same types of policies. But as usual, the Democrats, when they saw what was coming, they started talking about the fact, oh, it wouldn't work and this, that, and the other. But the bottom line is, you can see that the Democrats were against anything that was going to help the black community. Now, if that's not racism, what would you call it? If my total focus is to keep the black community under my feet and under my control, where I can tell them what to do, what not to do, where to go, what they can and can't do, this, that, and the other, making sure that their total survival depends on me, how are you going to say that's not racism? It's not, and it's not violent necessarily. It's another way of dealing with keeping the black community under their feet. Now, I want to go back a little bit because see, I'm dealing with the assassinations part of, like I say, or how the Democratic Party responded to the likes of JFK, which, like I said, once he was assassinated, his vice president came in and reversed everything. So that goes to show you right there that they wanted to keep things the status quo, so to speak. Then comes along Martin Luther King Jr. when he starts talking about the fact that, among other things, people should be judged by the color of not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character, and among other things, and nonviolence and so forth. Well, what happens? He gets assassinated, and what happens? Along comes this policy, affirmative action. For those of you that don't realize what affirmative action is, it's the exact opposite of what Dr. Martin Luther King was talking about, where you do judge people by the color of their skin. But this time, it's put in a position where the blacks can go look at an employer or someplace like that, and see that if the person don't have enough blacks working for them or something like that. It's totally on looking at the fact that there's no black people working. They or getting into schools and so forth, classes and things like that in these high colleges and so forth like that, you know, to get degrees and so forth. The whole gamut of things is all based on how many blacks do you have in your classes? How many blacks do you have working for you? How many blacks are in these higher positions? If you don't have the right number of blacks in there, then we're going to sue you and penalize you for not having enough blacks in there. The whole thing behind this is the Democratic Party wants to show that they're friends of the black community by enacting policies where blacks can go out and sue companies, schools, individuals and things because of the fact that evidently if you don't have any blacks working for you, you must be a racist. What they're missing out on all this is sometimes people, the blacks that may have come in weren't qualified. Because, you know, a lot of times, you know, entry exams in the schools and so forth, exams that you may have to take before a company will hire you or something like that. All of these things, people have to find out how smart you are, which basically means the content of your character. How much do you know? It's not the color of your skin. What do you know? How much do you know? Can you benefit the company or what? Do you have the knowledge to work in this position, or do you have the knowledge or whatever it is to be able to come into this class and things and be understanding what needs to what you need to do and so forth? That's content of character. Well, what happens? Democrats and some blacks rise up and say the tests are too hard. They're based on racist, this, that, and other. See, there, it's always knocking down anything that would essentially show that the black community, due to the fact that the black community in a lot of instances, there's very few blacks that were capable because of the education that they got in public schools, which were once again in urban areas of our nation, in cities and so forth, where the public schools were essentially, in order to keep blacks under the Democrats' feet, were undereducating them, where they would essentially make sure that the person could not qualify to get any of these good paying jobs or get into higher education college classes and so forth, because of the lack of the proper education. This is not saying that blacks are inherently ignorant and incapable of doing things, but it's the fact that if you've not been taught the right things the right way, and you've essentially been purposely, deliberately undereducated, well, then you're basically still a slave. Education, knowledge is power. And the Democrats want to keep that knowledge from you, so they put you in, they have you in schools and things like that where they deliberately undereducate you. And consequently, you can't pass the test to get into these good jobs. And so what happens is, then the Democrats rise up trying to show that they're friends of the black community, say that these tests and things need to be thrown out, or that under affirmative action statutes and things like that, that because black community, the history of the black community being, as they put it, disenfranchised and stuff like that, that they need a break, so they give them some extra points on their tests and scores and things like that to help elevate them. You know, like a handicap thing like you do in golf and things like that, how certain people have handicaps because they may not be quite as good, so you give them some extra points and things. Well, that does good to some extent, but the bottom line is, when these people get on jobs and so forth, this handicap is going to eventually, if they did get in on the job or whatever, this handicap is going to rise up and show that the person may not have it all together enough, especially in medical fields and things like that, where, you know, it's good to be able to get in the medical field, but what you're gonna do when somebody's life is on the line and that handicap reveals itself and a person dies, as what happened in the case of the Baki case. The black man Patrick Chavis got into a medical school based on affirmative action, even though he had a lower score than this white guy that was not able to get in because of the quota system and things that they had in place back then. This guy, Patrick Chavis, made it through medical school. He did his residency at a hospital and things. Then he started where, you know, in a hospital, you work in a residency, you working under or being observed by superiors. Well, he finally went on after, you know, he got his medical degrees and so forth. He got through the classes and things, got his medical degree, went out, opened up his business, a private practice. And shortly after that, after he did that, within a couple of years, he nearly killed, 2 people nearly died, and 1 woman did die because he went into the OB-GYN field, and he messed around and did something, and a woman wound up dying, and 2 women were basically maimed for life because of his actions or lack thereof, so to speak. And the medical board revoked his license and things, and one of the reasons, incompetency. That's what affirmative action does for you people. We got a lot of black folks out here in positions that they really should not be in, because the possibility is they're in there under pretenses. And this is not all blacks. I said a lot of blacks, not all blacks, are in fields. I don't remember Ben Carson, you know, he's a black man, but he had a good education and so forth, and he's done great things. So it's not necessarily that, but see, it's the case of you're in a crapshoot when you're dealing with affirmative action, because you don't know when or what a person knows or doesn't know. And when employers and things start looking at, well, here comes a black person, we don't have any black people, so in order for us to be in what's the term? To be in, you know, with the law, following the law, we gotta hire a black person. Let's hire this black person here, even though he may not fail the test. Well, we'll eliminate the test and hire him anyway. Fine, you do that. But then what's going to happen down the road if it's a life and death situation, and this black person that you hired ends up causing somebody to die, and then your company gets sued for malpractice or something like that. Now the whole company has to suffer because affirmative action required you to hire a black person. You hired a black person looking at the color of their skin, not the content of their character. And what happens? Bam! You're in trouble again. See, it's all of these things that are totally preventable, but the Democratic Party, in order to prove itself a friend to the black community, follows the policy of, hey, this is the way we're going to show you how we're friends. We're going to get you that job that you can't get. We're going to do this for you. We're going to make laws for you, this, that, and other. If you look at everything that the Democratic Party is doing today, it all boils down to two things. They are creating the misconception that they're your friend, when actually everything that they're doing is by design to keep you under their feet. The second thing that they're doing, and this is where I'm going to get on what I'm talking about for these black preachers and so forth that I mentioned earlier, black leaders, is these black leaders, and preachers included, as may have been the case back with the assassination of Malcolm X, Democrats or some of their followers or you know, some of their people that are not actually, you know, politicians, basically give these black leaders some money and say, hey, we need this to happen. We need you to promote this idea, promote this candidate, and do this, that, and other. And if somebody's coming up that's going to threaten us, you urge your people to go the opposite, you know, to ignore what sounds like is the good thing to do, because actually, you know, that the Republicans are the racists and so forth. And these black leaders are being paid off. The Jesse Jacksons, the Al Sharptons, the Michael Eric Dysons. I could, if a black preacher, I'm gonna tell you right now, if a black preacher is a leader in the black community, and they tell you to support the Democratic Party, I'd get as far away from them as I can. You know why? Because among other things, they're asking you to support a political party that's at war with the Christ that they are supposed to be serving. So, I mean, that's the one thing, that's the major thing right there. But even on the practical level, you're still dealing with a racist party that's trying to pass itself off as being pro-black, when actually everything that they do is against the black community. In closing, I want to tell you this. You remember Jimmy Carter, when he got elected, he was elected because a lot of blacks supported him to get him elected, supposedly because the Democratic Party was going to show their friendly side for being, you know, on the side of the black community. Jimmy Carter got hired, and what's one of the first things he did? Instituted policies that basically destroyed the automobile industry. And why is this so significant? It's because it was the automobile industry that helped a lot of blacks start achieving middle class status. Because working in the automobile factory, you didn't need to take an intelligence test. You didn't need to pass a lot of tests. They needed manual labor, and blacks were the number one people that were being hired to provide that manual labor. And the pay was good and everything was going great. And what happened? Jimmy Carter instituted the policies, destroyed over 1 million and some odd jobs for the automobile industry, the housing industry, all of which required manual labor. Knocked the black community right back down into being dependent on government again. So in closing, I'd just like you to consider all of these things. The Democratic Party, despite what they try to promote, is not a friend of the black community, period. I'm going to put some notes down in the details below this clip, and probably put up some information about a couple of books that I have written and published, and things that you can read that back up what I'm saying. See, there's a whole history thing that would take a lot of time for people to read, and therefore it would take too long for me to do it on the video here. But if you get the read the books, or read some of my other, or listen to some of my other clips, that I'll also put a link to the other clips about the education. So, well, one of my books deals with education. It goes into detail as to the plan that the Democratic Party is using and has used to basically keep the black community from achieving the American dream. May God bless you. Stay safe. And once again, I am out of here.